So here they are in this city uh, with its wonderful drainage, with its wonderful plumbing and indoors, the city of flowers and birds and causeways. They built long, you're talking about technology, they built long, long roadbeds over the lake because it was also a defensive position. So these are all wondrous to behold and great technological achievements.
Welcome back to Out of the Box podcast, where Steele and I, Jose, your host, get to talk about out of the box ideas. This is a channel really dedicated to searching for truth, searching for really interesting things in our world, and just trying to get the most mind-boggling ideas for you. But today we actually have a guest here with us. She is an amazing person, has been a professor for both Steele and I. And so, Steele, if you want to give her an introduction.
Yeah, so here we have with us Dr. Teresa Van Hoy, a professor of history at St. Mary's University in San Antonio. She got her Ph.D. at the University of Texas at Austin and master's degree at Wesleyan University. And she also published a book called Peons, Prisoners, and Priests, A Social History of Mexico's Railroads. And she's also working on a current book project called Cinco de Mayo and the Civil War in the Borderlands. She's also well-versed in areas like Mexico and the Borderlands, war and commemoration, and public history. And you've also worked on a lot of public history projects like the Henry B. González Oral History Project with a documentary, at the Centennial Commemoration, and then also stuff like World War I Centennial Commission, microdocumentary. Is there anything else you kind of want to add to it, or?
Absolutely. I want to thank both of you for your contributions to my work. Steele was my right-hand man and DP for the film, the documentary film that we made for honoring the centennial of Henry B. González. And Jose was a fabulous student in my classes and still remember his work. So happy to join you, gentlemen.
Yeah, we're happy to
Thank you very much, Dr. Van Hoy. Yeah, so today we're gonna get to share a special topic that's of big interest to Dr. Van Hoy, which is Aztec technology. This is something that's very interesting, just because, sometimes we think of our modern technology, what we're capable of doing, but we forget that back then in ancient cultures, they also had some advanced innovations. And so, yeah, Dr. Van Hoy, if you want to just kind of introduce the topic a little bit, let us know why you kind of gravitated towards that topic, and maybe we can go from there.
Okay. Well, this is a very special year for the for people who care about Aztec history. Last August 13th, 2021, was the 500th anniversary of the surrender of the Aztecs to the Spaniards. So in other words, I want you to imagine that moment when you are the last Tlatoani, you are the last emperor of the Aztecs. Your name is Cuauhtemoc. It's August 12th. Tomorrow you flee, you get in a canoe with your family and you flee for your life. And what do you say to your people? What kind, 9 out of 10 of them have died in the last 3 years. I mean, it's just a terrible devastation, a genocide and a demographic collapse. Your world is collapsing all the way around you, and yet you've got to come up with something to say to keep them strong. And so last year, 500 years ago, this past August, Cuauhtemoc gave a farewell to the Aztec people that kind of haunts my dreams, to tell you the truth. He actually, it was a poem. Imagine giving a farewell speech as a politician in the form of a poem. And you two fellas probably remember that poem because I rocked it in your class. But in that poem, Cuauhtemoc rebuilds the temple of the Aztecs that the Spaniards had destroyed. So at the very top, he mentions he honors the sun god just as they used to do at the top of the temple. And the very last line honors the earth goddess, the Mother Earth, the Father, Son, and the Mother Earth. And then he locates his people between the Father, Son, and the Mother Earth to keep them safe, and enjoins them to teach their children that really the secret to survival of their people isn't in weapons, it isn't in politics, it isn't in alliances, it is in teaching your children your songs, your poems, your music. So he said, just hide this treasure in your hearts and our people will survive. And they have. 500 years later, 50,000 people speak Nahuatl still. And so it's a big year. And I'm glad that you are focusing your podcast episode today on this subject.
Yeah, you know that ties in really well.
Yeah, that's so interesting that, he chose to conserve the treasure in their hearts almost. It's almost like, wow, because one would think like we have to conserve the riches or the money or the buildings that we've created, but no, like the essential was in the interior, right? So that's so interesting.
Actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, Jose, because they tortured him. They caught him the next day. So he gave the speech on the 12th of August. Spaniards catch him fleeing with his family the next day. And they're so happy because they're looking for the rest of the treasure of the Aztecs. They're looking for the rest of the silver and gold. And so they say, well, where is the treasure? And he says, the treasure of the Aztecs is the taste of corn, our corn. And so they're angry and they hold his feet to the fire and they torture him. And they say, where is the gold and silver? And he says, the treasure of the Aztecs is in the smile of their children. Where? So they torture him worse and worse. And of course, he never tells. So Mexican people are still looking for that treasure.
Wow.
They're still digging under the city to see if it fell off somewhere.
Wow. And is there ideas that there might be a treasure hidden still, or?
There are ideas. Yes, there are ideas. In terms of the treasure of the Aztecs, it was like in a fairy tale. So they capture. So first Moctezuma, the Tlatoani, what we call emperor of the Aztecs at the time of Hernan Cortez's arrival, he hosts them. He gives them a palace near his. So a week or so later, they say, well, hold on now. Won't you come over here and live in our palace? Or why don't we go over there and live in your palace? Because they're getting nervous, that things will happen without, that'll work out badly for them. So that works out. They end up living in the same palace. And then in no time, they capture him. And they hold him prisoner. And they say, fill this room with silver and gold if you want us to release him. And sure enough, they do. Aztecs fill it with silver and gold, and nope, they don't release him.
Oh no.
So things get crazy, but long story, 3 years later, they surrendered, because that was 1519 when Cortes showed up, and it's 1521 when the surrender happened. So all the Spaniards have to do is chill for 3 years, waiting for everybody to die of diseases. And of course, the main disease of which they were dying was smallpox. And smallpox, I could pull up some grim photos here on my screen to horrify your viewers.
We can do that with still can edit them in.
Yeah. So smallpox is pretty intense, but that's all he had to do to win was just wait for everybody to die. And so it's kind of a heartbreaking thing. Now, of course, the Aztecs were trying to kill him, but all they had to do was go and hide out with the enemies of the Aztecs. The people who had been conquered by the Aztecs were sort of not on the Aztec side, right? If you're having to give a tribute every year, you're having to, if the Aztecs are killing your people and sacrificing them to the gods, then you're kind of cool with offering sanctuary to the Aztecs' enemies in hopes that they lose, in hopes that the Aztecs lose and you become free. That was the miscalculation. It's like, oh, I know. I'll help the Spaniards so I can be free of the Aztecs, and then I'll be hunky dory. But of course, that never works. The enemy of your enemy is never your friend, because what happens is the enemy of your enemy destroys your enemy and then turns on you.
Mm.
So the real message in this history is fix your problems and stand together, because if finding what you think is a stronger enemy to help you out is going to set you free from your enemy, nope, you're going down with your enemy. So better be friends with your enemy, because
Yeah.
otherwise you're going down too.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah, and just to transition to other stuff with the Aztecs, I hear a lot all the time that the Aztecs had advanced technology and they were an advanced civilization. I've always been kind of curious, like what that means, and so like
Yeah. So let me just speak to what I regard as the greatest achievement, technological achievement of the Aztecs. And I think your audience will be amazed, because nobody else has accomplished it ever in the history of planet Earth. So this is let's call it hydroponics. Let's call this very advanced agricultural technology. Now, agriculture was the main economic mainstay, right? Back in the US, when everybody was farmers and ranchers. We weren't computer scientists, and we weren't, lawyers. We were farmers and ranchers, all of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so were the Aztecs, of course. And so the most important field for technology is going to be farming for the Aztecs. Now, I won't include ranching, because they didn't have sheep, goats, pigs, cows, chickens. They didn't have any of that. So there's no ranching for these dudes, but there is farming. And so what they did was figure out how to convert swampy marshland, very shallow lake type areas, the Valley of Mexico, into basically high yield hydroponic farms. So what they did was build enormous. So they got given this really crappy land. Everybody said nothing can grow here. This is marshy, swampy, and they were newcomers to the valley. There were 3 other kings when they got there, and so somebody realized they were strong and said, "Well, if you get rid of my enemy, I'll give you some land and I'll give you my daughter," all that stuff. So then, when the king who had hired them realized that they were really brutal and tough, great warriors, he thought, whoops, let me give them really bad land and they will leave. So he gave them this really bad land, but the Aztecs were brilliant at agricultural technology.
Mm-hmm.
So what they did was build huge baskets as big as a city block in Manhattan.
Oh, wow.
So those baskets were made out of reeds and grasses and saplings, really skinny, brand new trees, like think of bamboo type.
Mm-hmm.
So they build these huge baskets, and then they line them with leaves and line them with twigs, and then they start scooping up the muck, the watery soil, and dumping it into the basket. So think of 3 huge baskets, each the size of a city block, and then you dig a canal between them, right? You deepen that water between them. You scoop out that muck and dump it in the basket. Well, then you plant trees whose roots can go through water and anchor that basket into the subsoil beneath. So like a mangrove or one of those trees that goes through water and then anchors it. So now the basket's not floating around in this little canal, not floating around in this watery lake. And then they just keep going. They just do, dozens and hundreds of these baskets. So it becomes instead of a field where you farm, it becomes a lake where you farm, a shallow lake. You kind of almost walk through it, filled with floating islands the size of a city block, on which the tomatoes and the corn and the fruits is extremely high yield because it's very rich soil, very well watered. You don't have to irrigate. You don't have to worry about whether it's going to dry out. And so it becomes a paradise. And even today, 500 years later, you too can take a plane down to Mexico City, take an Uber over to a place called Xochimilco, place of flowers, fields of flowers. Xochi means flower. Xochitl means flower in Nahuatl. And you can rent a cute boat with your name, with the name of Rosa or Maria or Enrique. You can choose the boat that has your name on it. And you can set out. So there's somebody who's poling the boat, pushing the boat, like in Venice canals, right? They call it the Venice of the Americas. And so you're on that boat and you're going out between these little islands on your canoe, your little boat. And the mariachi boat will pull up and offer to play you some music. And the taco lady's boat will pull up and ask if you want tacos. And the tequila lady's boat will pull up and ask if you want pulque or tequila. And so it turns into a wonderful place to have your birthday party. But the thing that I most enjoyed when I did it was you can hop out on one of these islands and you can jump up and down, and the land undulates. The land gently, like in a basket, it gently undulates. And so it's kind of extraordinary to defy. You're looking around at trees, you're looking around at cornfields, and yet, the earth dances. So it's kind of a spectacular instance of their technology. But there's a few other examples too.
Wow.
But that's my favorite.
I think that just goes to show how smart the civilization was in using their resources. And I'm sure, like how you said, since it was improving the way of production of agriculture and all of that, then it helped them have more time for other things,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So they didn't have to irrigate them and have to worry about how they were going to water the plants. So that saves time and it produces more. And so then they just have to, make sure that everything's maintained, and then they could go and do other things and not worry about like it receiving enough water or anything like that. So I'm sure there's many like things that are based off of that, right? Like it
Mhm.
was like
Yeah.
that foundation
A
started
consequence. Yeah.
the civilization and to help them do other things.
That's right. Yeah. So I wish for your audience the chance to discover these chinambas, they're called. Chinamba is the name of these baskets.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. So we could talk about what becomes possible once your agriculture is high yield, if you want. What other things are possible? Is that a direction in which you'd like to go?
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
we can definitely touch on those topics
Other big
Okay.
for the Aztecs.
So
Yeah,
so I'll tell you. So that was what impressed me, the chinampas. What impressed the Spaniards was, I guess you might say, two things. First one was the hygiene. This 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 world on which they unexpectedly discovered, it was named Tenochtitlan. Tenochtitlan is the name of their capital city, and they regarded it as the umbilicus of the universe, the belly button of the earth. Their city. Their
wow.
city is on a cross pattern, just like for us as Christians, the cross is very sacred. For the Aztecs who weren't Christian at the time, the cross is also very sacred. For many peoples, the cross is very sacred. So they built main temple right in the crux of the cross, right there in the center. So, in Tenochtitlan, so the Spaniards are hiking in from Veracruz. They're going up over the mountains because Mexico City sits in a bowl of mountains, and it's ringed by mountains. And they're crossing what's called now, even today, the Paso de Cortés. It's the pass, Cortez's pass, and the pass is between two snow-covered volcanoes. So on one side is Ixtaccíhuatl, whom they call the sleeping woman, and on the Cihuatl means woman in Aztec, and on the other side is Popocatépetl, who is the warrior prince who guards her and loves her. So it's kind of a lovely little story anyway. So he's cruising in between the two of them, and suddenly below, they behold, these 400 dudes behold paradise, this beautiful city, sparkling clean, plumbing, drainage, all of the amenities that we take for granted now 500 years later, but it certainly wasn't the norm for Europe in 1519. You know, if you're in London, Paris, Rome, Vienna, Madrid, in those years, in the 1400s, you're basically dodging feces when you're trying to walk. There, if you're lucky, the streets are paved with cobblestones, but they're paved in kind of a V shape so that the maid or the housewife can throw out the urine and feces from the night, the night buckets, into the streets, and they roll down if you're lucky. If not, they just kind of pool up right there. But Europe at the time had so many diseases, Black Plague. Europe's population kept suffering famines and wars, and they couldn't grow. There was no population boom that was steady enough until the discovery of the Americas, when all of a sudden they get all these new food sources. So potato, tomato, chocolate, all of this comes from the New World. And all of this suddenly helps Europe to not only survive, but to thrive. So you can actually trace the debt that Europeans owe to the Aztecs, to the Inca, to the peoples of the Americas. So, so here they are in this city with its wonderful drainage, with its wonderful plumbing and indoors. The city of flowers and birds and causeways. They built you're talking about technology, they built long roadbeds over the lake because it was also a defensive position. So these are all wondrous to behold and great technological achievements. Another thing that the Aztecs, the Spaniards found impressive was the temple building technology. I want you to imagine that place where the temple was being built. And the Aztecs were new, as I said, to the valley. So they had just gotten there in the 1300s. Cortés gets there in 1521. So they're just only a century and a half or so. And Moctezuma, I think, is the seventh, only the seventh Tlatoani, only the seventh emperor. And I'll put that word in here in case your listeners want to know what I'm saying. So he's the seventh. Well, I want you to know how he succeeds to his throne, to his power. In Europe, you may have remembered. In Europe, you may remember that usually the next king was the eldest son of the dead king. Well, the Aztecs figured out a couple things about that. they figured out that that oldest son of yours might not be the brightest, might not be the strongest, might not be the best. In fact, he might be 4 years old, or he might be half dead, or that wasn't a great plan to invest the fate of your people in the hands of somebody incompetent just because he was your firstborn son. So the other thing is that the Aztecs figured out you don't actually know if that's your son, right? Because your queen might have had another lover, right? So they didn't have DNA testing back then. So the Aztecs realized, okay, so it's not going to be the son who inherits, because we don't know whose child that is. And it's not only the firstborn son, because he might be pretty lousy specimen, no talent, no strength. So what it's going to be is nephew of the outgoing Tlatoani, of the old king. So how does that solve their problems? Well, if Jose and I were born from the same womb, if we're brother and sister, we know we're blood kin, right? We have the same mother. And then if Jose is Tlatoani and he wants a successor that he knows is his blood kin, then he knows that anybody who comes out of my womb is his blood kin, right? Because I'm his sister. So Jose starts looking at my sons. And fortunately, I had 20 or something, and you had probably 20 sisters. So there's a big pool of candidates right there. All the sisters that came out of the same womb as you, plus all of their sons, become the pool for the next to choose the next king. Well, instantly it's obvious to everybody that Steele is the most talented of all Jose's nephews. He's strong, he's smart, he's got great dignity and bearing. He is deeply trained in the religious traditions of the peoples. He has the respect of all the allies. He has the fear of all the enemies. I mean, Steele's the chosen one. So he becomes, he is named the next Tlatoani, the next king, the next emperor. However, even then, we're going to put the boy on probation. Even then, Steele is not confirmed in his role until he can prove one thing, just like in the old Knights of the Round Table where you had to go out and prove your worth. Well, Steele has to prove his worth. So what does he do? He has one job, and that is to entirely build his temple on top of Jose's temple, on top of his predecessor's temple. So Steele doesn't build his temple out in the burbs, right? Because that won't do. Steele's got to have his temple in the umbilicus of the universe, right? In the belly button of the universe, which is right there at that crossroads. Steele can't be rolling his temple really big somewhere else. So Steele gets out there. It's a big logistic technological achievement. You got to make your temple cooler. You got to make your temple finer and grander and bigger, right? Because once Steele's temple is built, we can't see any of Jose's temple. It's gone from view. So
because it goes into the water?
No, because it's all plastered up on top.
Okay. Yeah.
In other words, if you cut a cross section down through the middle of the ancient Aztec main temple, you'll find 7 littler temples underneath.
Wow.
Right. So the first one for the first, and then the second one, and then the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, and then Steele's, it's like, So that is a technological achievement to be able to stabilize those previous temples, be able to make yours cooler. And remember, they don't have beasts of burden. So there's no mules or donkeys or horses to help roll these stones for Steele's temple. They have to put sand down. They have to lay a rock causeway and put sand down to limit the drag, to limit the friction, and drag Steele's big boulders up. And they don't have mortar. They don't have steel of any kind. They don't have metal or iron. So how does Steele carve his decorations into his stone, make his fancier? How does he get those feathered serpent heads? Well, that's looking for an even harder stone, which in their case was a black volcanic glass called obsidian. So they would sharpen obsidian and use that to carve those decorations in Steele's temple. So it was really quite an extraordinary achievement. And then he had to do one last thing. He had to inaugurate it. Right. So now you got it built, took you 3 years. Now the big day's coming. You're going to be confirmed as Tlatoani. And people coming from all over the empire to celebrate with you and to hail you as their supreme king or Tlatoani. And and so for that, Steele is going to need the favor of the sun god, of Father God, the Father Sun, and the Mother Earth. Because you've got to have their blessing. You've got to curry their favor in order for your people to have agriculture or their people to thrive. You got to have the sun god happy and the earth god is happy, right? So what does Steele do? Well, now he's got to organize a bunch of battles, and they're called flower wars, where basically the whole point is to capture warriors so that you can sacrifice them. So there you have, thousands because Steele's got to cover the entire temple with blood. Got to cover the whole thing. Can't miss a spot because then it's not consecrated. So the last Tlatoani was Moctezuma II, the one whom Cortes first captured and then killed. Actually, they claim that the people threw a stone and killed him, but obviously it was because of Cortes. So they say that the blood flowed down that temple and down the causeways, just into the lake. It was just crazy how much human sacrifice happened that day. And of course, there's lots of subject peoples who aren't pleased about this, no matter how much they're told it's an honor to die in this manner, either on the battlefield, for men to die either on the battlefield or as a sacrificial victim. Still, you would have rather lived, right? So that also helps you explain why the Spaniards are able to seek refuge with these other people while they're waiting for everybody to die and surrender. So these are all technological achievements. A little something real quick on the technology of the actual sacrifice. I think your audience will be interested. So they drugged them so they wouldn't be afraid. You know how when we go into surgery, we get numbed or we get knocked out or we get, anesthesia so that we don't feel pain, so that we don't feel fear. Well, they were likewise anesthetized. So they didn't feel pain and they didn't feel fear. In fact, they were not only anesthetized, but they were kind of given some other drug to pump them up so that it would be glorious and they would be not afraid. So they were awake, but they were not afraid and they were not going to feel pain. So we do have to give them credit for having figured that out. And so then they plunged the obsidian knife into the heart, only of the men. No women were sacrificed like this. And the priest would pull out the palpitating heart and offer it to the sun god of the Father Sun as an offering to keep him happy and keep him going, because they understood that death gives new life. So the Christian message of Jesus's death brings new life is very familiar to the mindset and to the cosmology of the Aztecs. They understood that death was required for new life. So, for example, the seed, when you plant it, it has to die. It has to split open and dry up before new life can emerge. So and then when we die, our bodies decompose and feed the earth. At least it did before we started doing other stuff. But back in the old days, you just got wrapped up in a shroud and buried and then in the earth. And for them, that moment was the embrace of the Mother Earth. Mother Earth took you back into her body, and then you would be reborn. So they would offer the heart up to the Father Sun, and then they would throw the body down to the Mother Earth. And her effigy, her name was Tlactecutli, her effigy, her enormous stone was at the bottom of the stairs. And she was actually depicted on her back in a birthing position with blood kind of out of her mouth. So she would take in the newly dead, and then the blood would be dripping out of her mouth to her womb. So your blood would feed her womb, and then she would give new life. So that was kind of the idea. So it wasn't just a strict power macho, hey, I'm a patriarch and I'm just going to kill you. It was for them the idea that this is our offering. This is our offering back. This is our sacred ritual. And so when the Spaniards Christianized the Aztec peoples, they got that whole thing of the transfiguration of the body of Christ and the blood of Christ and the wine and the host, and that was all quite made sense to them, and it made it easy to convert them in some ways.
Wow, yeah, that makes sense. I think it's so interesting how different cultures interpret things in different ways, and I think it just shows how and maybe that's how history repeats it, or parts of history repeat themselves like that, or even ideas in history. Like even like in the Bible of Leviticus, it's all about sacrifice, and it's all about, it's always that idea of killing something to sacrifice to this higher being. And yeah, it's just so interesting how that can be and translates in different cultures.
Yeah.
So it's even like in our modern culture, we're almost told to go for the long term, right? So we sacrifice the moment right now so that in the future we can have, I guess, more freedom or more opportunities. And so it's also that dying right now so that in the future there could be more life.
Psychological death, yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, even physical. That's what we tell our soldiers. Our military personnel are told you need to be ready to give your life for your country or for your homeland or your loved ones or something. So it certainly is a notion that has enormous, as Steele said, recurrence in history and all the way up to the present day. What else is cool? Well, I guess I could throw in a few. Go ahead.
I was gonna ask. I was so interested in the fact that the Aztecs had created like plumbing systems. They had created like so much technology to create that hygiene aspect that you were mentioning. And so I was just interested in to know, like, how did the Aztecs educate themselves so that they continued to create ideas? That they have tables where they brainstormed like how to do something new, or what was their common practice to create innovative technology that would advance the civilization forward? I'm not sure if there was a common practice.
This is great. Yeah, this is great. Well, the thing is that these notions of drainage and plumbing, so drainage in the city and plumbing in the abodes, in the homes, is way more ancient even than the Aztecs, and it's universal. So the Romans had it. Remember their baths, remember their aqueducts. Every ancient peoples who try to build cities, because some ancient peoples don't build cities, but every ancient people who builds cities understands that you got to keep it clean. You got to keep the water in and out. However, that went downhill. We lost it in Europe in the Middle Ages. We sort of lost that technology. And what happened was that we condemned the Romans as pagans. So the medieval Christians did not want to take a bath. They did not want to do any of that stuff that the Romans were doing because that was pagan. So we sort of shot our nose to spite our face. It was only later that hygiene and cleanliness becomes clearly a virtue necessity. And a necessity. Yeah, That only becomes realized maybe 1,000 years later. We recover that understanding. And then it's interesting that the phrase becomes in the 19th century in the US, cleanliness is next to godliness. So then all of a sudden
Switches,
the
yeah.
culture shifts back. Yeah. But it wasn't the case in medieval Europe and for the most part. So people would, for example, use an old piece of bread because they didn't have a spoon, they didn't have a utensil that was only for rich people. So they would use an old piece of bread to dig out the soup or whatever from the pot, and then they would just reuse it. And that piece of bread actually gave them what was called trench mouth, because it was like a trench. It was kind of in the shape of a trench, a spoon type thing. So so we kind of had a big nasty setback there for about 1,000 years while we tried to figure it out. And my takeaway from that is that, look, if we just blindly reject things because we're condemning the people who embrace those things, then we're probably hurting ourselves. In other words, if you just hate somebody, you're going to end up hurting yourself, because you're going to miss the beauty and the wisdom of what they offer you and your society. So I'm, as a historian, there's a bunch of stuff I don't like about the Aztecs. Obviously, the patriarchy's very rigid. There was capital punishment even for kids who disobeyed. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that's really a problem. There's killing all these men in their prime. But I don't feel that my job as a historian is to judge and to say, well, these guys are good and these guys are bad, because historically everybody's got a little of both, and you're wise to figure out what is dangerous about each culture and what is beautiful. And then you're probably in a better position for your own happiness in your own world, is the main thing there. They had universal education. You were asking, like, how do they get these ideas?
Education, yeah.
In the Aztec world, every child got an education, girls and boys.
Wow.
Rich and poor. That was not happening in Europe.
Oh, wow.
So once you educate your youth, once you invest in your youth, you can prosper real quick. Every single culture that has invested in their children, help them grow and learn and eat well and be joyous. Wow, that culture takes off. It really does.
Yeah, I was going to say.
China, yeah.
Yeah. That's why they were more advanced than other cultures, because they not only had their agricultural stuff together and were kind of had that solved, so they didn't have to worry about that thing, but they also had education that kind of everyone was educated. So it's like, yeah, the more people you educate, the higher chances you are going to have innovation. So
Absolutely.
And was the education geared more towards agriculture, or was it also like management? Is there something that maybe I don't know if you might know some topics that they kind of covered in their education to kind
Well,
of.
their education was everything. Their education was religious. Their education was practical home matters and city building and civic management. The agriculture also. Basically, there were two schools. The Calpuli, I forgot which was which. There was kind of a class difference. This is a society, in my view, sort of flawed by social hierarchy. So there's the nobility, there's the priest class, warrior class, then there's the Masewaltin. Masewaltin is Pipiltin is the nobility. I'll put it in here in case anybody's interested. And then the Masewaltin are the commoners. Now, among the commoners, there was still divisions. So there was the Pochteca, who are the merchant class. So it's kind of interesting because, we have also sort of elites, and then we have regular working class people, and then we have business people of enormous clout and prominence. So it's kind of odd, really, when we think about the parallels between their hierarchy that, in my view, doomed them, and our hierarchy, which I think may also be hurting us. That some people have so much, and most people have so little, and kind of live precariously. So I think that would be a cool thing if we sort of gave that some thought. That what would have happened if the Masahualtin had really been very secure, had really been able to eat enough, had been able to, um, had not been having to spend so much time being warriors and killing other people, but had really been able to devote themselves to the well-being of their society and their families. We would have, I think the Aztecs would have been harder to defeat. Um, and likewise, we've got working class families who have 3 jobs, and the kids basically have to take care of themselves because nobody can afford childcare to help them out, to kind of watch over them. So I mean, we might be in some kind of funky little danger that way ourselves. But at least they had universal education, which Europe did not have at the time, and they learned poetry, and they learned
Like the arts.
arts, absolutely, carving of obsidian and carving of jade. They learned many, many things. It was a rich education. Oh, and another fun thing was that men, Aztec men, reared the sons, and Aztec women reared the daughters. So you were deeply trained in your gender roles as well. So basically, the women had all the kids until age 5, until women were rearing the kids until age 5, sort of like our kindergarten age. And then the boys go to their fathers for instruction in the manly arts of war and farming and whatever else they were doing, hunting, whatever, carving jade, whatever the men jobs were. And the girls would be under the instruction of their mothers for religion, the upkeep of the goddesses. There were many goddesses as well as gods. So the boys would have to learn to take care of the gods, the god of water, the god of all the gods. And the girls would have to learn to honor all the goddesses and keep the whole world in balance. So I could end on a chilling and haunting and beautiful thing about that, if you'd like.
Yeah.
And in Texas, you two gentlemen probably heard about this, since you, I presume, grew up in Texas. Did y'all grow up in Texas?
Yes.
Yeah. So have you ever heard of La Llorona? La Llorona.
Yes.
She is. What did you hear? Do you remember? Can I put you on the spot to see what you heard about her?
Yeah. So it's like a tale of this woman who's like lost her kids, right? And would
Mhm.
mourn by the riverside, and sometimes people would pass by the river and hear somebody crying, which is Llorona, right? The crier.
Mhm. Yeah, the
Um,
crier. Mhm.
and so that's kind of like what I've heard.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's very good, Jose. And, me putting you on the spot like a real professor here. And some people have heard another further angle to that. So definitely, she's by the river. She's lost her children. She's crying, and if you go by the river, she can hear it, and it haunts you, right? This legend of La Llorona. But there's another more sinister underbelly to it, and that is that people say, and she'll grab you. If you're not good, La Llorona will grab you. I don't know if you ever heard that part. Like, she's a
Wow.
threat to you, kind of. Yeah.
Mm,
So the actual historical origin of La Llorona is these Aztec mothers. And here's what happened. They were raped by the Spaniards. They were taken as wives and concubines and other lover
mhm,
roles. And so they bore children who are half indigenous, half Spanish, right?
mhm,
And these children are the sole heirs of the huge fortunes and land holdings that these new soldiers, the conquistadores, the conquerors, uh, earned for their conquest. They, like, let's say that Jose is a conquistador. He was with Hernan Cortez. He ran all those risks, and now he owns the size of from here to Corpus in land, right? So you're a big, rich dude, and your
Mhm.
son is half indigenous and half Spanish, right? So what happens is those conquistadores did not want those indigenous women rearing their kids, right? They want you to become Spanish. They want you to speak Spanish. They want you to be Christian. They want you to be powerful. They want you to go to Spain on a vacation and rock your grandness, your prestige.
Mhm.
You know, Tapia. You are Tapia. You are not some just indigenous Aztec kid. Well, so they got nervous because at the end of 5 years, the kids couldn't speak Spanish well. They couldn't. They knew the songs, and they weren't that good at Christianity. They knew the songs and the religions of their mothers, your wife or your concubine. So, so the Spaniard took them away, took the kids away at the age of 5. By then, they had been able to bring nuns, Spanish nuns from Spain, and build a convent. So they put the kids in the convent, and they said, "Forget Spanish, forget Nahuatl, forget your mother, forget the songs. You are Spanish, speaking Spanish, practicing Christianity, and you are going to represent the greatness of your father." And so the kids were terrified, of course, because they had been taken away from their mothers, and the mothers were heartbroken because they would never see their children again. So every night they would circle the convent and they would cry and they would call out their child's name and they would sing the songs. And they would weep. And so the nuns said that they were witches, said that esas lloronas are dangerous. They're going to grab you if you try to escape. They're going to grab you and hurt you if they're trying to enchant you and, 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 and draw you out of the safety of the convent where they will eat you and drown you. And so this fear that we have and this notion of her having killed her own kids and now she wants to kill you too, that is a distortion and a secret cover up of this tragic thing that happened to the first generation of mixed race mestizo kids born of Aztec mothers and Spanish fathers.
Wow. Yeah, I think that leaves it on an amazing note. Didn't I actually, never knew that it was related to the Aztecs, and so it's really interesting to find that out. But
Great.
yeah, we thank you a lot for having come on the podcast, Dr. Van Hoy. I'm not sure if Steele, you have any last thoughts.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you as well. It's really awesome. I love it.
Thank you for bringing your audience to this beautiful, intense, powerful, tragic history. And I did want to give a little shout out because, as always, I need you. I need young people. I need your audience. I need them on our public history projects. The latest one we are doing, in fact, I think you two gentlemen may have been stuck in the early years because I've been working on this since 2018, and I think I may have had you then. No, actually, Steele, you and I finished up in 2016, I think, with a Henry V. Gonzalez. Yeah. So Jose may have also missed this one, but I am working with my hundreds of students to get a bill passed through Congress, which will recognize the German American children who were interned during World War II. Japanese Americans have been recognized by Ronald Reagan in 1980. The Italian American children have been recognized by President Clinton in 2000. And this year, we are seeking recognition for the German American children who are now old and dying. And they want us to help them find peace, that that their time behind barbed wire as American kids will not be forgotten. So our project is called Remembering Our Children, and we're running an event next Saturday at St. Mary's, 11:15 a.m. for the National Day of Remembrance. There's a National Day of Remembrance for interned World War II internees every year all over the country. But if you Google it, you'll see only Japanese Americans mentioned. And we want to remind everybody that in the same camps at the same time, playing in the same swimming pool, were German American internee kids living behind barbed wire too. And they are now 78, 82, 92. They're dying, and they ask to be remembered.
Wow. Yeah, we'll definitely remember that for sure. Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Van Hoy, for sharing. And I mean, I certainly enjoyed the great spirit that you bring to the podcast. I've learned a lot, honestly, and just goes to show how technology really comes from the culture, right? It's almost like an outer expression of who this community was in Mexico. And so I think you cannot mention the technology without the people, right? Who they were. And so I think that this was a great transition. It flowed into, who a little bit of the Aztec community. So we really thank you for your time. Thank you for coming on today, and surely hope to send this over to you as soon as possible. But yeah, I look forward to continue talking maybe a little bit more in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for keeping history alive for all of us. Good luck.
Awesome. Thank you all very much. Take care.
Bye.